We are going to continue the conversation from the main stage that we had this morning on diverse perspectives in GEOINT Tradecraft. This is something that I'm really excited about to hear from this panel, because I think it's an important topic, but it's also relevant to the Tradecraft community. So with that ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator, who is Amy Ayler. Please come. We have Tony Frazier from Maxar, Jessie, Bliele, Ness Sandoval, and Kelley. So please don't hold back. We'll be walking around with cards. And also, please remember, we have the YPG reception this evening. It is outside, so I know that excites a lot of folks. So anyway, Amy, go for it.
Is this thing working? Thank you, John. Appreciate that. I first want to say thank you for inviting me to moderate this conversation. It's, as we all know, it's important. We've been talking about it since the very beginning of GEOINT. So I would like for each of the panelists to please introduce yourselves and tell us where you're from and a little bit about what your organization is all about.
Okay, is this, yes, working? All right, great. So, hi everyone, my name is Tony Frazier. I'm an Executive Vice President at Maxar Technologies. We have two parts of our business. So we do space infrastructure, so we build spacecraft for communications missions, Earth observation missions, space exploration. But then we also are a leader in Earth intelligence. So that includes everything from owning and operating satellites to collect imagery of the Earth. You've seen a lot of our imagery in support of the current Ukraine crisis. But then we also do a lot to exploit that data and deliver insights to different mission partners. So we're right down here. So if you haven't stopped by our booth yet, I encourage you to do so. I run our public sector Earth intelligence business. So, so basically, all the work we do with the US government and our international government partners. So excited for the conversation today.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Jessie, Bliele. I'm with the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. But right now I'm on assignment working with Harris-Stowe State University in St. Louis. It is a historically black college or university, the only one in the city of St. Louis and one of two in Missouri, and helping develop curriculum and research opportunities for undergraduates in geospatial. So we're really excited to be here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ness Sandoval. Ness is my nickname. There's a very long history of my full name is Juan Simon Onesimo Sandoval, and there's a very long story to that name. I'm a professor at St. Louis University. I'm trained as a demographer, but most of my work is in spatial demography, spatial statistics, and so I have lots of hats that I wear at St. Louis University. I co-direct the Ph.D. program in public and social policy. I direct the master's program in sociology, but I also am the associate director for the Taylor Geospatial Institute. And in my specific role, one of my tasks is on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do we think and reimagine programs for students who are in the STEM fields. And so I'm happy to talk about how we want to work with our partners to reimagine programs that are inclusive of different students.
Okay, how's everybody doing? My name's Kelley. I am the president of Upslope Advisors. We're an 8A professional engineering service firm that supports the federal government. What do? We do stuff for the government, right? But more importantly, I am a graduate of Morgan State University at HBCU in Baltimore, Maryland. And what we do as Upslope is we're a mission-first, people-first company. What does that mean? We take care of the people so they can take care of the mission. So we're there looking for the brightest people in the field, bring them in, doesn't matter where your background is, come into the field, work with us, and let's go solve the major problems that the governments have or the needs that they have. So thank you very much, and looking forward to do this panel.
Thank you to everyone. We're going to start off the panel with the first segment. We're going to go around the horn. It's going to be specific questions for each of you. and then a little later on, we'll open it up for questions to the, from the audience. So Aaron, in respect to diversity, what does the future of GEOINT, geospatial, look like to you?
All right, I'm actually very excited about that. Because one, if you've been to all the panels on the main stage, there's been a lot of talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So that means they get it, right? They know this is important. And number two, if you look at my panel, I'm actually happy that I'm on this panel. We got Tony and what he's doing at Maxar on the educational side. They're just doing great things, because like when I was going to school, we didn't have the opportunity to do GEOINT or do geospatial. But now there's universities like Harris Stowe, they're doing great things, and in St. Louis University. So I'm very encouraged. So now people get that, it's not the same type of person. Everybody has the voice, and like what Adobe's doing as well, right? There's a voice, and now everybody understands that, we're better together, and let's get all these voices together so we understand and we make better solutions. So I'm very excited about where the future diversity is in GEOINT and geospatial.
Awesome, thank you so much, Aaron. Tony, can you talk a little bit about creating on-ramps and conditions in GEOINT that increase representation?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that is really personal for me is being able to better yourself, through bringing your talents, to new, industries and new opportunities. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. First male in my family to graduate from college, and so for me, I had no idea that there were industries like the geospatial industry, that we actually could build satellites and collect data and build applications on top of it. And so as I've progressed in my career, I've been really motivated to both think through ways to expose people who may not have as much background in our industry, access to opportunity, and also do that not just with talent. I have about 1,200 folks on my team. We're hiring probably 300 people a year. So not just in terms of onboarding talent through our internships and other types of outreach efforts, but also in bringing more diversity to the supplier base. So companies like what Aaron's doing, so being able to kind of support opportunities to bring in new small businesses into our community. So those are some areas that I'm really focused on. One of the things I'm probably most proud of over the past few years is the partnership we've had in St. Louis. As an opportunity to show what you can do in partnering with local academic institutions. We started a relationship with Harris Stowe, State University, and we had our first hire out of the school, which we're psyched about. Freddie, give a shout out to you there. But then also we're kind of exploring other types of efforts like certifications, working with different tech companies, creating ways to expose youth at the middle and high school level, to our industry through mapathons. I mean, I think all those really inspire engagement, which as we do what we need to accomplish to move the mission forward over the next decade, I think is going to be really critical. So just a few examples that has made a big difference for Maxar, and I think is important as we look to cultivate the community.
Excellent, thank you so much, Tony. In the introduction to the panel, we mentioned that diverse perspectives are necessary for executing the GEOINT mission. Jessie, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, thank you. I hear this a lot, diverse perspectives, and I think there's a lot of ways that you can approach like what that means. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit. To caveat my answer, though, in addition to being a GEOINT professional, I'm also a mathematician. So allow me just a brief foray into statistics. But in scientific inquiry, when we are trying to prove something, we always first assume a null hypothesis. That's like the boring thing. That's like nothing happens. This drug does not work. This vaccine does not work. This treatment doesn't work on this population. And then we're seeking new information, collecting data, and we're trying to reject that null hypothesis and accept the new hypothesis, some new information. First of all, I don't think enough of us take research methods or statistics to really get that, even in a scientific way. But are we doing that in our personal lives as well, in our social interactions? When we meet someone new or interact with a new company or a new group of people, do we try to collect new information to reject or get rid of our biases or stereotypes before we actually make a judgment about this person? As a personal anecdote or an example of how this happens to me, I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation. Jessie, are you married? Yes, I'm married. What does your husband do for a living? And I have to take this awkward beat and say, well, my wife works at this small nonprofit focused on sustainability, which then leads to all the gears, right, clicking in this person's mind. Some of you probably had to do a quick reset, right, because you maybe saw me and you made maybe a judgment. So that's like a null hypothesis, right? You accepted like sort of like a societal norm or some, null, right, without gathering new data or information, to make a new judgment about who I was, or just allow yourself to collect information about me. So how does this connect to GEOINT, right? So the comments made to me on a personal level are at best annoying, at worst very hurtful, right? But we cannot afford to make mistakes like this in our GEOINT work. Right? We can't rely on biases or stereotypes or the norm or what's been accepted, or we'll never discover anything new. We'll just continue doing the same work. So when we think about diverse perspectives, that means, well, one, on an individual level, opening yourself up to new experiences, taking different trainings, different skills that you don't have yet, but also from a workforce standpoint, bringing in people with different backgrounds who won't look at that problem the same way as you do. Yesterday during the panel, this really stuck with me. Maisha Glover from BAE mentioned that sameness is not an asset, right? To me, sameness is like everyone reinforcing the null hypothesis. That doesn't get us anywhere. We don't get to innovate that way. We don't discover anything new about a population, about an issue. And in GEOINT, it's essential that we open ourselves up to new experiences, new understanding.
That was beautifully said, Jessie. Simply because we had that conversation just on the main stage yesterday. And it's to the point now where hopefully we don't have to keep having the same conversations. So thank you for that, and thank you for your perspective. Ness, as a researcher that studies spatial inequality, how do you think about the fluidity of diversity and inclusion in American cities, universities, and neighborhoods?
Thanks for the question. So as a professor, I have the privilege to interact with students, and we get to talk about how they experience the city, what the city means for them. But one of the things that's most difficult for us to talk about is, what does diversity mean? And so we use this typology of racial classifications that the government has official definitions on, but we never really understand the history of how those classifications were created. And so we go through this history of the ideology that was in place and when these classifications were created. And oftentimes it's very uncomfortable for students to understand that there was a huge element of racism at the foundation of the creation of these categories we use today. And so we talk about the fluidity in 2020 of how students have different identities. And so we use these categories because society is very complicated and the stories are very nuanced. But we want to come back to these categories. So we go through the census and we're able to look at the microdata, and we're able to see that people are very, very detailed in terms of how they identify themselves, in terms of what they see as diversity. And it gets lost because we end up taking all these stories and we put them into 8 categories. So what we're doing is we actually can go beyond. When we talk about diversity, it's more than 8 categories. It's 49 categories that you can look at. And we always ask the question, why did we default to the 8? Why don't we default to, I think this year it's 54. We could use the 54 in our normal discussions, but it would require more effort, more intentionality to be inclusive. But so there is this, we have to be intentional, right? Because students are using those categories. And they're very, like at my university, we had a discussion about, well, who is Asian American? And we have some students who feel like, well, I'm not Asian American, they have a different identity. But our university still says, well, you're Asian American. Or there's an interesting debate that's happening on campuses, like, are you Latino or are you Latinx or are you Hispanic, right? And so it depends. If you're in Miami, you probably say, I'm Hispanic. And if you're in Los Angeles, you're probably saying, I'm Chicano. And so we have to be very mindful of geography and how these categories, how students and individuals use labels to identify their own personal stories. And so this is very privileged for me because I get to hear students talk about these categories. And so this may be new or may not be new for some people, but like one of the largest categories in Los Angeles right now are students who identify as Afro-Mex. Like they are neither black or Mexican, they are Afro-Mex. Well, that's not an official category by the census, but it's the largest category in the Los Angeles public school system of how students are identifying themselves, because these are students who are coming from different backgrounds, and they're saying, this is my identity. I'm not gonna make my identity conform to the census. I want to tell my story. And so we have to, when we think about diversity in the future, these categories are changing because we have a new generation of Americans who are saying, these categories do not represent who I am. They don't represent my story.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? It's so much, you can go so far with those conversations. And I'm so happy to hear that you're having those conversations, and it's bringing people into the fold so you can talk about it.
Yep.
So we got some questions from the audience. So I'm going to read a couple of the questions from the audience, and this is for, I'm going to ask for each of you to give your thoughts on this. We talk a lot about the ethical, moral need for diverse GEOINT industry, but how do you diverse perspectives impart the work of GEOINT?
I'm happy to start. I mean, I think that we're seeing that we're being asked to take on bigger missions than we've taken on in the past. I mean, for many years, I've been with the business industry now for 11 years, and a lot of the emphasis had been on improving maps and getting image assessments out to people. But you heard over the past couple of days the way that we're really driving improved decision making on faster timelines, and it requires a more diverse set of talents to deliver those types of insights. And so we've seen just during my tenure a change in the talent base. So you can bring disciplines of image science and data science and software development and DevOps and all those areas, product ownership, as ways to be able to contribute to a mission. And then as we've also looked at different generational talents. I think we're seeing with this crisis that people who worked the Cold War for over several decades, bringing their expertise around tradecraft with some of the insights we can get from people who understand social media. There's just a tremendous opportunity to be able to get after these problems by bringing together diverse talents to innovate. And so I think that's a lot of what we're trying to get after, but in doing it in a way where we can open the talent pool to a broader cross-section of the community as possible.
Jessie, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll give an anecdote from like the perspective of stovepiping in organizations, and many of you might have experienced this in your own work, right? Like at NGA, historically a lot of our missions have been stovepiped. So you're working this topic, this issue, and you work with just your team, right? You're not reaching across the other parts of the agency. But I've also had the privilege over the past couple years, I've moved around the agency and gotten to see parts starting to work together. And I know that sounds like shocking, but I think to me it's like, wow, like this is what we're supposed to do. But I recognize that in academia, there's a similar problem, right, of like the departments and the stovepiping. And again, I've had the privilege now of being part of the St. Louis community and in the academic space. And now we're seeing like universities working together. We're seeing industry working together, academia and industry and government all being together on one project. And we're getting a lot done that way. And we're opening it up to all those organizations, all those different disciplines to get insight and experience from the others. And I think that can only, be good. And I think that's good for our students to see, for people who are looking to enter this field. It isn't just one thing, right? They don't have to go to this one thing and they're going to do that one thing for their whole career. There's all these opportunities to collaborate and move around and get other experiences that are going to help us solve these big problems.
Excellent. What do you think, Ness?
So I think I'll kind of answer it from the point of view of a demographer. So there are a lot of assumptions that are made about how we use information. And so one example that comes to mind is one of the core demographic transitions is migration, whether it's refugees or people who are moving. And in St. Louis, we had a fairly large movement of people from Mexico to the St. Louis region. And it was just assumed that everybody spoke Spanish because they were from Mexico. But we found out very quick, like within hours, that Spanish was not the primary language, it was Mayan. And we were not prepared because we had prepared, like, we need Spanish speakers. And so we were not ready to really incorporate and provide services for them because we had just made these assumptions that were not valid. And so I think part of it, we have to go back and think about, are the assumptions we're working with, are they actually valid? Or do we need to relook at our work of knowledge and get better assumptions? This comes from their first perspective. People who are working in this area immediately told us, yeah, this is what you should have expected. Why were you working under this assumption, right? So,
Aaron?
Yeah, so I agree with what everybody else said there. It goes down to breaking down your unconscious bias, right? Break down the stovepipes, because everybody, I went home, I asked my wife what geospatial is like, it's just maps. No, it's more than that, right? We all know here it's more than maps. But, it's just, there's more, you bring in more different diversity, more different disciplines, you get better answers. It's just like different people. You bring in different people, different, like older, younger, like you said for the Cold War. Older people, well, old people don't know. Like, well, no, they do. They know a lot. They got us here, right? Younger people too, like they don't know anything, they're too young. No, they need to be there too, right? So by just breaking down these stovepipes and breaking down the unconscious bias, you get to learn a lot more and you get better answers. And that's how we get more diverse answers and get better answers, more fleshed out answers by just breaking down the stovepipes, start understanding the unconscious bias and just learning more from the different diversities.
Excellent. I have another question from the audience. What are some differences in making DEI progress in large companies versus smaller orgs? How do we tailor solutions? Tony, I'm going to ask you to kick that one off, Mr. Maxar.
Yeah, I think it starts with a real commitment from the top, to really create an environment, that is not only diverse but inclusive, but belonging is a phrase we use. One of our values is you matter at Maxar, and we want to make sure that that promise is consistent for all members of our team. So that's where we started. And then, over, I'd say 2 years ago, over the course of about 6 months, we did a ton of listening sessions, with our team members just to understand, what was on their mind and what we can do to offer, more consistent employee value proposition, to those individuals. And then that led to, some areas where we can get better, as a company. And so whether it's being transparent, in what our current metrics were around diversity from different facets of diversity across our organization and hold ourselves accountable, for what we can do to move the needle, at different levels and roles across our organization, thinking through the way that we can not only get after this as a company, but what we can do as an industry. I think that's one of the things I've been most excited about over the past few months is that, because we're all having these conversations, the fact that, it's a topic that's so prominent here at USGIF Joint Symposium, this week. I was at Space Symposium a few weeks ago, and there was a similar commitment to, make a real impact over the next decade. And I think as we want to lead, in this industry, it's incumbent, upon us to, to really commit to driving generational change. And I think that's an area where we have the scale to do that. Not only, again, with talent, cultivation, but also in thinking about how we work with more diverse organizations as business partners as we build out the ecosystem.
Anybody want to add anything?
Yeah, I get it from the small business, right? When small business is a little bit easier, you can touch all your people, right? And for at least Upslope, we're a small company, right? And we could go out and talk to everybody and hear what they're really saying and understand what their pain points are. And I'll be honest, there's things I assumed about DIB that I understood, but then I talked to my employees and be like, oh, I didn't understand that. Okay, that's a great point. And that's one thing great about the small business side, we can kind of actually hear and do instantaneous changes. Like, okay, I understand that. Let's not do that anymore. I didn't understand how this was affecting you. We can make those changes. So, small business is great that you get a chance to do that, right? And then, we do look to the big companies too to see what they're putting in place because they got these great policies, right? Let's learn from them. I always think like what Maxar's doing, I'm learning from them also. So taking what I'm able to do on the ground floor, talking to the individual employees, taking what companies like Maxar are doing from a big thing and just merge them together to kind of make the best answer, to make the best decisions.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll add one other thing. I mean, I think NGA counts as a big business, but something that we were doing in the Pride Council, I think the deputy director mentioned that we have a number of special emphasis program councils, for different affinity groups, and one of them is for the LGBTQ plus community, and we're called the Pride Council. And at NGA, we offer a training. It was a 4-hour training for allyship, like teaching our employees how to be allies to the LGBTQ plus community, but it turns out that the skills we were equipping them with just made them like better colleagues to all their colleagues. It wasn't just for that one community. But when we would ask the participants, like, what brought you here? Why are you here? And it was often language. They didn't know what language to use. Now, we all know that language is evolving, right? So the terms that student people are, referring to themselves as. And so we were really just teaching that, like, pause, break down the unconscious bias, and listen to what that person is saying before you make an assumption again. But also really teaching them some of those words, some of the things they might hear from their colleagues, and be more comfortable. And then when they left the class, they left with a placard that had the NGA Pride logo, and we asked them to hang that up outside their cubicle. And I likened that to sort of like a little beacon of light, right? If you had that on your cubicle, then people like me knew you were an ally, and I could come talk to you about what I did last weekend with my wife, because it was just a place that I knew I could be myself. And I think we can replicate that for other groups and that education piece, and make our workforce just more accepting and more willing to have exchanges with people who aren't like them.
That's excellent. And this can lead into the next question, which is for you, Ness. Okay. With other organizations defining race and ethnicity, how can we, as companies, agencies, et cetera, ask and understand people's preferences without making the wrong assumptions or offending our colleagues?
So one of the themes in the panel yesterday, and I thought it was very important, is we have to listen. I think if we do a good job of listening, we can hear how people are using these categories. And just from my experience with students, you have to create that environment where people feel safe and there's a sense of trust that you do have an interest in treating them as a human, treating them with dignity, right? I think this was one of the themes yesterday, is part of this whole discussion is people should have the opportunity to live a dignified life, and we should listen to how they want to tell their stories. And so sometimes we don't do a very good job of listening because you got to use these categories. And I had to do a survey for the government about 2 weeks ago, and it gave me 5 options, and that was it. There was no other option for me. And none of these categories reflect me. I had no other choice. And so we have to, we have a local NPR station, and they do a pretty good job of every time you go on the station, they try to get a sense of how people self-identify. And they do a really good job of making sure it's very inclusive in terms of the language that's used, and making sure that if none of the categories that are traditionally used by the census you identify with, there are options there for you to be very clear. And so it's hard, though, because institutions they want to report to these categories, these 4 or 5 categories, and sometimes they're not accurately capturing what's really happening in society.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Like I said, it was a perfect question after what you were just saying, Jessie. I have another question, and I'm going to try to make out this handwriting. Sorry to call out whoever wrote this. How do you see technology enabling action in diversity and inclusion for organizations? Anybody want to take that?
So I will, I'm going to come from my perspective from the university and working with students. I think there's an assumption that technology is neutral, right? That it could always be used for good. But it actually, if the people who are writing these codes are biased, the bias is built into the algorithms. And again, this is an assumption. Maybe it's like, oh, the algorithms are good and they're natural and they don't discriminate. And then you realize, oh my gosh, the algorithm's discriminating. Well, why is it? And so I think we have to, technology can be good, but we also have to recognize that the biases can be built into those algorithms. And so we have to have we have to be critical, but also look at what can be used to improve the human condition.
I think I'll just add, on the other hand, I've been working with the students at Harris Stowe, and I've been able to see them use technology, use like ArcGIS and Esri software to see the inequalities in our city. And I remember I was working with the team, and we pulled up a map, and I was like, oh, look, like, if you're a St. Louis, and there's like the Delmar Divide, and you visualize some of these differences across the city, and they're like, wow, and I think like that's like powerful if we can like put the tools in their hands to be able to actually see some of these issues visually. But you're right, I think like the tools have to be accessible, to be able to use the technology, has to be well understood by every person, not just like the group that created the technology.
Yeah, and one thing, and I'm going to go from like the user perspective, right? Now there's requirements, 508 compliance, right? Make sure that the people who are actually using the tools, using the technology, whatever it is, can actually understand what it is, right? There's no excuse anymore. There's guidelines, there's ways to do it, 508 compliance. There's new technology, so it doesn't matter where you're coming from, what background you are. There's solutions so you can actually understand the code and use it the way that's supposed to be intended. So I'm glad that we're doing, especially NGA is doing a great job ensuring you got 508 compliance, and I know USGS and a lot of other people as well. So I'm glad it's the technology as well that people are using.
Tony, do you have anything to add?
Well, I'd just say a related topic is by making things like data and tools and technologies accessible, it's a way to, again, open up opportunities for people that may have been non-traditional paths into our industry. And so I know it, as an example, we've seen that with some of the open data science programs, SpaceNet, that we sponsored in the past, that people who didn't go to MIT or Stanford, but had access to our satellite imagery and machine learning training data, was able to build some amazing algorithms, and win competitions, against some of the best data scientists in the world. And so I think that's a big part of this, which is how do we create more opportunities for people to bring their talents to our industry, and the more that we can democratize that, I think we'll be better for it as a community. And so I just encourage all the members to think about ways that they can help support that.
Thank you. I have another question. Well, I know who it's from because it's written in green. Anyone who knows what's written in green, it's from Ms. Karen Hayes Ryan. And it's directed to me. Ms. Ayler, we are seeing a significant increase in the appreciation of diversity from previous GEOINTs. Thank you for being a champion. Will this continue going forward? I certainly hope so. It absolutely needs to continue going forward, so absolutely.
But I added, we need to use this moment to move the needle. It's really, really critical. And I think there was a question earlier about, how do we use technology, to kind of document where we are and show progress. I think, Jess, some of your comments, there's roles that we play as leaders. I'm an executive at a company, and and roles as a hiring manager, roles as doing business development relationships. But there's also roles each of you play. I think there's a lot of opportunity. One of the things that's been really inspiring for me is, as we've stood up our employee resource groups, seeing some of our emerging talent that sees this as an opportunity to make the company their own. and bring forward issues and actually build relationships, expand their professional networks, across the company. There's a individual out of our space team that I would have never worked with on a day-to-day basis, but he's in Palo Alto, out of our space team, but really passionate about building out our Latinx community at the company, and it's been great to get to know him and identify ways that I can help mentor him in his journey. And so I would just encourage you that the way we're going to see this play out over the generation is we're going to see more people from different backgrounds do great things to move the community forward, and so let's take advantage of the moment.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, and I agree. Like we keep the needle pushing going forward. And one thing I want to say, and this is a conversation that we had last night, very, 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 very late or early, depending on how you say it. And the guy was like, "This is great. We're having these conversations," because they were scared to have these conversations a couple years ago. They're having conversations now that they weren't willing to have. It doesn't matter what different people like. I was scared to have there's a real conversation last night. I was scared to have a conversation about diversity, but now we're able to get to it. Now, are we perfect? No, I'm not going to say that everything's fixed. We're great, but people are more willing to have that conversation, understanding, looking at their biases, and be like, okay, we're different. That's okay. It's good. But as long as you're willing to have the conversation, which I think was really great, that USGIF is really focusing on, we're all going to get better together. So I think this is great. Keep on having the conversation. If you want to have a conversation with me really early or really late, bring it on, right? They're really fun. So
I would add one additional. I agree with everything that's said, but if this is to go forward, there needs to be intentionality with resources and power, right? These are not just side-off events that happen on the fringe of the conference. It has to be the core, and there has to be a commitment with resources. And at the university, we talk about this all the time. Like, we do a good job of talking, but when it comes to resources and giving people power, it's a different discussion. And so I'm always pushing, like, if this is really meaningful, give us the power and give us the resources. And when that happens, and I know that we're turning this conversation around.
Jessie, what do you think?
Yeah, I just wanted to go off of something you were mentioning earlier, Ness, about the census. I mean, even in the census, there's no information even collected about like the LGBTQ plus community. It's not even a question. And so you're right about changing these institutions, like making real change, actually doing something to collect this data, get actual information, be inclusive, and use the right language. So moving beyond that talk, and I'm inspired. I think we're really getting there, but we can't stop having the conversation. Going back to the original question.
Jessie, you spoke about NGA having training. With you, Tony, or Ness, or Aaron, what do you think about that, and how can we prioritize to make training as a part of inclusion, talk diversity, belonging? How do we get it to that point to where we can have a training session about it?
well,
I think in universities, this is pretty standard now. Like, this is, there may be some universities this is not part, but I think at most universities, this is the heart and center of our discussion. Is like, we have to confront these realities. We were talking about diversity. What does this mean? So I think it's slow. They're slow and they're open. But I'm not sure about the professional side in terms of to what extent it's happening. But I think universities are eager to create these spaces.
Yeah, I just add that it's becoming an expectation of our leaders. Again, one of the things we do is we do a recurring engagement survey, and we've been identifying different ways to segment the data by team, location, but we're looking at how we can leverage these different facets of diversity as a way to understand, are we actually creating a environment where team members of all backgrounds can do their best work. And so having that as a way to keep ourselves honest, are we making progress? And then having our leadership development training to really reflect that. What can we do to create, to understand unconscious bias, and other things we can do to help, provide support for our team members. Otherwise, we're in a war for talent. People are going to go find areas where they can, have a better experience. So it's definitely something that we focus on our leadership team.
yeah, our thing is let's not make it scary. This is not a scary topic, right? This is not scary. This is not something that you have to have. This is a conversation we should want to have, right? And with me being a small business, I'm able to kind of do the best practices to see how we have this conversation and not make it scary, feel like, oh God, you're picking on me. Like, no, we're not trying to pick on anybody. We're trying to have a conversation so we all learn, understand, and get better. And that's what we got to do, and that's what we're focusing on. Let's have a conversation. And when we do training, it's not like it's not a requirement, even though it might be a requirement depending where you're at, but it's a conversation, right? This is something that you want to have versus something that you're forced to do, right? And that's what we're trying to do here, make it a conversation.
Thank you so much. Our time is wrapping up. I personally would like to thank each and every one of you for sitting up here and giving your perspective of what can be done, how it's being done, and the way forward. Aaron, Ness, Jessie, Tony, it's been a privilege. I hope you all got out of it what I did, which is, it's a conversation. Let's not be scared to have the conversation. Once we can have the conversation, then we can move forward. I'd like to thank each and every one of you guys for coming to visit.